Welcome back, folks. My name is Wyatt. I am the college conservative. This is my 6th episode now, so that's awesome. So I hope y'all continue and continue enjoying what I'm putting out. So I'm going to conclude my 3-part series on independent regulatory commissions, kind of the history, a little brief history, and why they're constitutional and just why they're generally crappy. Anyways, so I discussed in the previous episodes about Madison's words in Federalist Papers 41 through 43 about basically the powers that were the economic rights, the economic privileges, or a patent, which I explained in the last episodes. A patent is basically just an economic privilege given to by the government. So the patent clause, which patent is not in the Constitution at all, which I mentioned before as well. So the government was only given 3, maybe a couple more clauses than that, but pretty much the main economic privileges the government was given were in really 3 main clauses, which was the Commerce Clause, which was the Coin the Patent Clause, sometimes also called the Copyright Clause, and then in Article 1, Section 10, Clause C. If you want to know about those, go back to my previous videos as well. I would get into them, but I don't want to make this video too long. Anyways, I also talked about Gibbons v. Ogden, and about how the federal government has way taken advantage of that case as well. I talked about that in my last video. And so I also talked about, which was really, really important, really crucial, how in the preamble, statists and centrists and Democrats and those on the left have really taken advantage of the welfare clause, in the preamble, and have really tried to make that some sort of writ of power to the federal government via the Constitution, which it wasn't at all. It was just a general blanket statement, just as with the Insured Domestic Tranquility. That's just a general statement. That's not to create some sort of governmental commission of tranquility, so to speak. It was not in any way, shape, or form any sort of authoritative power given to the federal government. Anyways, and so Madison said that it would be contradictory for the federal government to be given these very specific and very minute in nature power delegations in these 3 clauses, if then in the welfare clause in the preamble it would have just been a general writ of power. And Madison actually speaks about this in 42 specifically, and says how there'd be no reason for us to put these very specific powers that really didn't affect commerce that much anyways, except for to stop the monopolization inside the states, which is the whole point of the Commerce Clause. So he said that there would be no point to put that in there. There'd be no point to put in those 3 little clauses with very specific and really very small authority towards the economy if we were to just put a blanket clause of the government can do whatever the hell it wants to, whenever the hell it wants to do it, because it feels like that's what's best for the people. And that would have been a total contradiction, and that would go against the spirit of the Constitution anyways. And I hope you all like my coffee cup. Come to the dark side. Alright, so that leads me into Munn v. Illinois. I'm going to explain this case real quick. So Munn v. Illinois basically was about the Grange movement, which are a bunch of farmers, and they were complaining in the state of Illinois that that companies and grain storage companies and grain elevator companies such as IRC was charging the farmers too much to store their grain. So what happened was the farmers pressured the Illinois State Assembly. State Assembly and Asteria passed laws that basically put a ceiling on the pricing, put a ceiling on how much these grain storage companies could charge the farmers. And so this went all the way to the Supreme Court. And so obviously Iris Munn, he argued that this was against his constitutional rights of due process, that the state government can't actually do this. Well, what the Supreme Court actually found was the state government actually has general patent power, or did not found, but really restated that the state governments actually have a general patent power, which a general patent power would have been given to the federal government if the General Welfare Clause, for example, was a general writ of authoritative power, but it wasn't. But the states do have that. And the reason why the states do have that is because they're closer to the people, and if the people so choose to want to have these, then that's okay. Which that would mean that California, for example, was the first state to have an EPA-like commission before the federal government did under Nixon. So that means that the states have the power to have these general commissions, that have these energy commissions, these whatever commissions. And even Justice Story, who's a nationalist, even Justice Marshall submit this as well. Both these people are were bigger government judges, so to speak, in the past, and they even concluded that it would not even be smarter, but it'd be constitutional, and it is constitutional that the states would have the power to pass health laws and health and safety laws and environmental laws and whatever else. Now, this does not mean that the federal government does not have the authority to make general laws about, let's say, carbon emissions, or let's say, pollution, or pollution that going to water, or toxic pollution, or any of that stuff. It's one thing to make general laws saying we can only have X amount from any factor anywhere, from anything anywhere. It's another thing to now have the EPA and to continue making rules and rules and rules, especially when the EPA brings the rules that it proposes to the big businesses. The big businesses can have in the biggest firms in the industry, for example, so that they can put their 2 cents in. Of course, they're now going to collude to the point where it's going to hurt the smaller firms, which these regulations do in the first place. So that's why we always need to be careful when we're passing regulations, and it needs to be a must, because it'll always harm competition in some way, shape, or form. Anyways, so Munn v. Illinois really just stated that the states have the general patent power and that they have the ability to lay on these regulations and these taxes. And it really was brought out because the grain storage facilities were quote unquote for the public use. They were of a public use, and since agriculture is such a huge and crucial industry, I guess they felt it justified. I don't necessarily like the way that. I can understand where it's coming from. I just also understand that states can take advantage of this general patent power as well, to the point where it becomes unconstitutional. Anyways, so moving on, there's another case that kind of changes this, which is what goes to creating the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, our country's very first regulatory commission. And so that is Wabash, St. Louis Pacific Railway Company v. Illinois. So basically what happened was the same company was charging 2 different rates to New York for 2 different railways because it was further away. What basically happened was it went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court adjudicated that that it would be unfair, that this would create a monopoly, basically. That it's not fair to charge New York or different New York businesses differently because they are getting, even though it's from the same company, it's from different railways, not be further or whatever else. In that sense, since this was commerce between 2 states, and it was being brought out unfairly and would cause monopolization. So the federal government was right with the way it adjudicated it. However, it took the ruling of it and the federal government and really said, okay, well now we have the power to regulate, really proactively regulate pricing of railroads between the states, which no, that's not right at all. As we can see, as I said in Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, it says no state shall, without the consent of Congress, and then skip towards the middle, enter into any agreement or compact with another state. Now, this means that the states could have created a compact. What happened was, this was happening between Illinois and New York without there being any sort of compact between the states. So I can understand how, and it was not at the consent of Congress, thus it was and it happened to be negatively affecting commerce and would drive up and would help a monopoly. That's the whole point of a commerce clause. The whole point of a commerce clause is for the federal government, of all beings, to step in and stop laws that foster monopolies inside the states or even between states. That's the whole point of the commerce clause. Now, the reason why the states have a general patent power as well is so the federal government does not have monopolization power or incorporation power, because that would just way be stepping against the limits of the Constitution. Anyways, so this in 1887, this was the Wabash case. 1886, excuse me, was the Wabash case. 1887, the federal government creates the Interstate Commerce Commission, which ended up favoring some railroads over the others, of course, and which ended up favoring truckers when trucking came in. Ended up favoring them as well. At first, they were attacked, but then they got their people in there as well, so to speak. Very George Stigler-ish. If you want to look up George Stigler at all, he's a very smart man. Spoke about basically how when government gets bigger, industry will take it over, or industry will become buddies at least. And so to the point where regulations that are passed in favor of the bigger firms. So now when you have things like the EPA, the Department of Education, you have HUD, you start understanding why things start getting more expensive and why the dollar starts getting losing value. Now this goes into a much bigger topic, a much bigger discussion, which I would have to spend hours and hours upon. So just real quick, basically what happens is when now you see the Department of Education passing Common Core. Don't pass Common Core. It's not. You don't even have the federal authority to even have the Department of Education. That really should come to the states. But what it is under the 14th Amendment, they were saying, well, they need to be treated under the law equally. Well, they're not being treated under the law equally if some people are getting better educated than other people. We'll leave that to the states to decide, not to the federal government, especially when the federal government doesn't know what the hell these people should be learning or ought to be learning. And then when you make crap like Common Core and take away money further and further from the people to help subsidize their own kids' education for just a heap of crap, you can see why the founding fathers, made the Constitution the way they made it. And then when you see the EPA, when the EPA creates rules, you don't know where those rules spring from already, and you don't know even how the collusion that was between big business and them in general. And I have nothing against big business, as I've said before. I'm just against the collusion. And that will always happen. My professor actually even surrendered this point that the environmental laws, environmental regulations, ones that are many times unnecessary and unconstitutional, should be passed because even if the top 10 biggest firms are the ones that can really take the brunt of the cost. Meaning the smaller firms are going to be pushed out. What does that do? That kills jobs, that kills competition, that raises prices more. That's all that happens. When the federal government kept getting bigger, big firms and big businesses realized, hey, we can use this entity, the freaking biggest gun in the world basically, to now dictate the market. That's all they're doing. And that's all that's been happening. So because of these three clauses that I named before, because of what Madison described in the Federalist Papers, and because of these cases that I've pointed out, the federal government over time is just trying to accumulate more power to the point where it feels like it should be proactive in regulation. No, you can regulate commerce between states, and if states do things outside of a commerce compact, not on the consent of Congress, and it causes monopoly, then the Congress has the power to step in order to stop monopolies. To stop such an action, such as two different rates going to the same exact state from a different state for the same railroad company. Anyways, folks, I hope you learned something. I know I didn't go too as deep as I could have. Like I said, I could go on to this for weeks. However, I hope you learned something. I thank you so much. Come back next week. I'm going to be pulling some stuff out of the crap my teachers say notebook, basically. And so I hope to see you soon. My name is Wyatt. I'm the College Conservative.